The sun hung low over the vast cracked earth as Eleanor Evans stepped off the dusty train platform in Amarillo, Texas. The year was 1932, and the world felt brittle, like it could break apart at the slightest touch. The hot wind clung to her black morning dress, tugging at the hem like invisible fingers trying to pull her back, but she didn't stop walking. She had buried her parents the day before, and now, with the key to the family estate pressed tightly in her gloved hand, she was going home. The Evans house stood on the edge of a dry field, its silhouette warped by time and sun. The wooden boards groaned under her footsteps as she climbed the familiar porch. The windows were dull with age, and the garden, once the pride of her mother's hands, was now a wild mess of overgrowth and rot. Weeds tangled with the old rose bushes, and an odd sweetness hung in the air, like decaying fruit. Eleanor paused at the front door. Her heart thumped with a strange rhythm, slower than fear but deeper than sadness. She hadn't been back since she was 16. Too many memories were buried here, some half-formed, others too sharp to forget. She turned the key, the door creaked open. Inside, the air was stale, thick with dust and silence. Everything remained as it had been when she left. The tall grandfather clock frozen at 3:17, the lace-covered furniture veiled like ghosts, the painting of her father still dominating the parlor wall, his stern eyes watching over the room like a judge. Time had folded in on itself here. She walked slowly through the house, each room echoing with memories she wasn't sure she trusted. The upstairs hallway still creaked at the 5th floorboard. The scent of old tobacco clung to her father's study. And in the back of the house, where the kitchen opened onto the garden, a chill ran up her spine. The garden. It shouldn't have grown so wild, not in this heat, not in this soil. She stepped out into it, the old iron gate screeching in protest. The path was nearly gone, swallowed by creeping vines. In the center, the ground sloped unnaturally, as if something beneath had begun to push upward. She didn't linger. That night, sleep was shallow and restless. She lay in her childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling while the wind whispered against the windows. The house groaned and sighed like it was trying to breathe after being asleep for years. At some point, she must have drifted off, because the next thing she knew, a loud knock rattled the front door. She threw on a robe and hurried downstairs, the cold wood biting her feet. When she opened the door, a tall figure in a brown uniform stood waiting, Sheriff Clyde Barton. His presence felt like gravel in the throat, rough, unwelcome, dry. "Miss Evans," he said, tipping his hat. "Sorry to disturb you. Just heard you were back in town." Eleanor nodded. "Just yesterday." "I came to offer my condolences," he said, but his eyes didn't match his voice. They were studying her, reading her like a book left open too long. "Your father was, well, he had a reputation." Her jaw tensed. "He was a difficult man, but he was still my father." The sheriff looked past her into the shadowy house, then back to her face. "Folks say strange things about this place, Miss Evans. Been saying it for years." "I'm not here for rumors." "No, I reckon you're not," he said, voice softening. "Just, if you see or hear anything odd, you let me know. The land out here's old. Carries things." She shut the door before he could say more. Back upstairs, Eleanor sat on the edge of her bed, the sheriff's words echoing in her mind. The land carries things. She glanced toward the garden again, the sliver of moonlight cutting across the window pane. Things had never been right here, and deep down, she knew. She had come back for more than just the estate. Something had drawn her, like gravity, back to this house, this land. Something buried, something waiting. If you're drawn into Eleanor's mystery, make sure to subscribe to the channel now so you don't miss what comes next. The secrets hidden beneath the Evans garden are just beginning to surface. Eleanor awoke to the sound of creaking floorboards, slow, deliberate, like someone pacing the hall outside her room. She sat up, heart tight in her chest, and listened. Nothing. The house had always had its noises, especially in the wind, but this felt like presence. She climbed out of bed, wrapped her robe around herself, and stepped into the hallway. Moonlight streamed through the window, casting long shadows along the wooden floor. The air smelled of old varnish and something musty, like earth after rain. She walked down the corridor, listening for the sound again. silence. Still, a strange pull drew her downward toward the kitchen. She moved barefoot, careful not to make a sound. When she reached the bottom of the stairs, the draft hit her. Cold, wrong. The kind of chill that didn't belong in a Texas summer. In the kitchen, the cabinets remained untouched, their paint peeling at the corners. The window above the sink framed the garden in ghostly silver. Eleanor scanned the room, her eyes drawn to the pantry door. She hesitated. Then she saw it, an edge of something behind the shelf. She stepped forward, tugged the shelf aside, and found what she hadn't remembered being there, a narrow wooden door, padlocked and flush against the wall. Her skin prickled. The cellar. She didn't recall ever going down there as a child. In fact, she couldn't recall it existing at all. She tried the handle, locked. She'd have to find the key. Turning away, her eyes landed on the small wooden crucifix above the kitchen doorway. Her mother had always been devout. She used to pray there every morning, whispering so softly Eleanor had to lean close just to hear the words. But by the end, her prayers had turned frantic, the words sharp and rushed like she was bargaining for time. Back in the hallway, Eleanor climbed the stairs to her parents' room. Dust coated everything. Her mother's vanity still held a collection of dried perfume bottles, hairpins, and a jewelry box. She opened it. Inside, nestled between tarnished brooches, was a folded note yellowed with age. She unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was unmistakably her mother's, small, tight, elegant. Only one word was written on the paper: run. Eleanor stared at it, her fingers trembling. No explanation, no address, just that. A warning, a final plea. A floorboard groaned behind her. She turned sharply, heart pounding, but the doorway was empty. Leaving the note on the vanity, she crossed to the wardrobe. Inside, her father's suit still hung stiffly, like empty shells. She reached behind them and found a dusty metal box shoved in the corner. She carried it to the bed and opened it. Old photographs, mostly black and white, curled at the edges. Family portraits mostly, herself as a baby, her parents younger, standing stiffly before the house. But then there were others, people she didn't recognize. Children dressed in Sunday clothes, all standing in the same garden. One girl stood out, a few years older than Eleanor, with dark hair and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She felt a flash of recognition. But the girl wasn't her, and Eleanor didn't remember any siblings. Beneath the photos she found another letter, this one addressed to Samuel Evans. She didn't open it. Instead, she took the photographs and note and returned to her room. Sitting on the edge of the bed, she stared at the unknown girl's face, trying to conjure a name, a memory, anything. But nothing came. Just that hollow feeling, like there was a door in her mind someone had locked from the inside. As the night deepened, the wind picked up, rattling the window panes. She tried to sleep but found herself listening again, to the creaks, to the soft knocks that could have been the house settling or something else. At one point, she thought she heard her name spoken, barely audible, like a breath on glass. When morning finally broke, light seeped into the house reluctantly, barely cutting the gloom. Eleanor dressed and went downstairs. The pantry door stood exactly as she had left it, still locked, still waiting. She ran her fingers along the wood, felt the cold metal of the padlock. Whatever lay beneath the house had been hidden for a reason, but something told her it wasn't going to stay hidden for long. The morning sun was already harsh by the time Eleanor stepped into the garden. The air was dry and heavy, pressing against her chest with an almost deliberate weight. She had barely touched her breakfast, distracted by the images of the girl in the photograph and the strange note her mother had left. The locked cellar door loomed in her mind, but for now it was the garden that pulled her forward. She had always remembered it as vibrant, filled with roses, lavender, marigolds. Her mother had once said the land bloomed best when left alone. Now, though, it looked like something had been growing unchecked for years. Vines climbed the fence, tangled like grasping fingers. Thorny branches curled toward the house, and the soil looked too rich, too black, like it had been fed. She knelt near what used to be the rose bed and ran her fingers through the earth. It was warm, soft, almost damp. As she dug deeper, she swore she heard something, a faint sound beneath the surface, a breath, a murmur. She froze, but the garden had gone still again. She stood abruptly, brushing dirt from her hands, her heart pounding harder than it should. She wasn't imagining things. There was something wrong here. The garden felt like it was watching her or listening. That afternoon, Eleanor walked into town, needing distance from the house. The streets of Amarillo hadn't changed much. The same general store, the same rusting signs, the same watchful eyes. People glanced at her and quickly looked away. She heard snippets. Evans' girl's back, that cursed place, and ought to be left to rot. She found Clara May near the old church, sitting on a bench with a basket of herbs in her lap. Her grey eyes met Eleanor's with something between caution and curiosity. "You look like someone walked over your grave," Clara said, not unkindly. "I need to ask you something," Eleanor said, sitting beside her. "About the garden." Clara didn't answer right away. She picked a sprig of something green from her basket and rolled it between her fingers. "Garden's older than the house," she said finally. "Older than your daddy, older than most things out here. It's not just weeds, it's growing like it's alive." Clara looked at her then, steady and unblinking. "Because it is, child." Eleanor tried to laugh, but it caught in her throat. "You don't believe that. I believe what I've seen. I worked that land for your mama when you was little. It listens. It feeds. That soil's soaked with more than water." "What does that mean?" Eleanor asked, voice rising. "What's in the soil?" Clara looked away, her expression hardening. "Things that should have stayed buried. Some roots run deep. Deeper than truth, deeper than memory. You knew my mother. You must have known something was wrong." "I knew she was scared," Clara said softly. "Toward the end, she wouldn't go near the garden. Said it whispered, said it wanted something from her." Eleanor's skin crawled. "She tried to warn me. She left me a note." Clara's hand stopped moving. "Then you'd best listen." That night, back at the house, Eleanor couldn't sleep. The silence pressed in too tightly. She stood at the window overlooking the garden. The moon cast silver across the twisted branches, the overgrown rows, the dark mounds where flowers once bloomed. And for just a moment, she saw it. The soil shifting. As if something underneath was turning. She blinked, and it was still again. She left the window, heart hammering, and descended the stairs. This time she didn't stop at the kitchen. She opened the back door and stepped into the garden barefoot. The soil was warm beneath her feet. The plants trembled without wind. She walked to the center of the garden, where the earth sloped unnaturally. She crouched, dug her fingers into the soil. She didn't know why. She only knew she had to. Her hands hit something solid. She jerked back. Her breath caught. She dug again, slowly, carefully, and uncovered what looked like old wood, splintered and soft, a piece of something buried long ago. Suddenly the whisper came again, closer now, almost human. A voice too faint to understand, but unmistakably there. Eleanor stood, chest heaving, and fled inside. The next morning arrived with a grey haze hanging low over the house. Eleanor moved through the rooms as if in a trance, unable to shake the sensation from the night before. Her hands still bore faint traces of dirt beneath her nails. The skin at her fingertips was raw from digging, but she didn't stop to clean them. Something else called her attention. The attic. She hadn't been up there in years. As a child, it had scared her, filled with broken furniture, dust-covered trunks, and shadows that stretched too far. Now as she climbed the narrow staircase, each step groaning beneath her weight, she felt that same unease blooming in her chest. She pushed the door open. Dust danced in the light from the small circular window. The air was thick with age and silence. Boxes lined the walls, stacks of old linens, forgotten trunks, but what caught her eye was the covered object leaning against the far wall. A large sheet, grey with time, hung loosely over it. She approached, her heart drumming. Pulling the sheet away sent a cloud of dust into the air. She coughed, waved it aside, and stared. A portrait. Her family. She was a child in it, maybe 4 or 5, held in Beatrice's arms. Samuel stood tall beside them, his hand resting on Beatrice's shoulder, his expression unreadable. It might have been a standard family painting, if not for one thing. Across all their faces, deep slashes had been carved into the canvas, not once, but over and over. Violent, deliberate. Eleanor staggered back. Who would do such a thing? She scanned the attic and found more portraits. Smaller ones, older ones, all defaced, faces gouged out, eyes blackened. She reached for a cracked frame in the corner and found another photo, not a painting this time, and again that same unfamiliar girl from before. This time, the girl stood alone in the garden. Her eyes stared directly into the lens, her expression blank. The photograph had been folded, then torn. Beneath it, a child's drawing. Crayons scrawled over yellowed paper, stick figures, a house. A sun in the corner, and beside the house, two girls holding hands. Eleanor felt a cold weight in her chest. She remembered drawing something like that once. She could feel the crayon in her fingers, but she only had memories of being alone. She backed away from the pile, nearly stumbling over a loose board. Her foot hit something hollow. Curious, she knelt, pried up the board, and pulled out a small tin box. Inside were scraps of paper, torn pages from a journal, some stained dark brown. She unfolded one and recognized her mother's handwriting, though the letters were jagged, frantic. He watches me in my sleep. He knows I remember. I should have left when I had the chance. The girl, she never left the garden. Samuel lied. Lied to me, lied to her. I hear her crying at night. The words blurred before Eleanor's eyes. She clutched the paper and fled the attic. Downstairs, her legs felt unsteady. She sat at the old piano bench, her hands trembling. That girl, the one in the photograph, who was she? Why did Eleanor feel like she knew her, like a shadow at the edge of her memory? A knock startled her. She turned toward the front door, her pulse racing. Through the lace curtain she saw Thomas Lorne. She hesitated, then opened the door. "Thomas," she said, voice low. He looked her over, concern etched in his face. "You all right? Heard from town. You'd gone walking barefoot through the garden." She stepped aside. "Come in." They sat in the parlor. Eleanor told him what she'd found. The photos, the portraits, the drawing. She didn't mention the voices, not yet. Thomas listened quietly. "Maybe it's just old family history. Pictures from before your time." "Then why were they hidden?" she asked. "Why were their faces slashed?" He didn't answer. Eleanor leaned closer. "Do you remember me having a sister?" Thomas furrowed his brow. "No." "You were an only child, weren't you?" "I thought so too," she whispered. "But I keep finding her, in photos, in drawings, and I think I remember her. Not her face, but the feeling. Like someone was always there, just behind me." Thomas stood, pacing. "Eleanor, this place, it's not good for you. Maybe you're just processing grief." She stared at him, something twisting in her gut. "Am I going mad, Thomas?" she asked quietly. He paused. "No, but maybe the house is trying to make you believe you are." Outside, the wind picked up. The garden rustled. Eleanor felt the house shift around her, like it had heard everything. That night, Eleanor couldn't rest. Her mind circled endlessly. Portraits defaced, the girl in the photographs, her mother's broken handwriting. And under it all, the strange sensation she'd felt in the garden, like something beneath the surface was moving, breathing. She waited until the house was dark and still. Then she rose from bed, dressed in silence, and took a lantern from the hall. The wind had quieted outside, and the night had turned unnaturally still, the kind of stillness that swallowed sound. She stepped barefoot into the garden. The earth was warm again, unnervingly soft beneath her feet. She crossed to the sloping patch at the garden's center, the place where she had dug before. Her fingers found the wood easily this time. She knelt and began digging around it with her bare hands, dirt caking her nails, her breath shallow. She uncovered the edge of what looked like an old wooden crate, half decayed, the grain swollen and dark. She pried at it until the wood gave way with a soft crack. Inside was a child's shoe, worn, small, faded pink, with a cracked leather strap. Eleanor froze. Next to it a rotting doll, its face smudged, one eye missing. The doll's dress was stained and shredded. Something about it made her chest ache, like she'd seen it before, like it belonged to someone she once loved. Her hands trembled as she held the shoe and doll, unsure what to do next. Then, behind her, a twig snapped. She turned sharply, holding the lantern high. A figure stood at the edge of the garden. It was Sheriff Barton. "What the hell are you doing out here?" he asked, voice low, unreadable. Eleanor stood, quickly brushing dirt from her hands. "Digging." His gaze dropped to the open hole. "In the middle of the night. There's something buried here." "There's always something buried, Miss Evans. That's how the earth works." Eleanor's jaw clenched. "You think I'm losing my mind?" "I think grief does strange things," he replied, "and I think this house does stranger." She held up the shoe. "Tell me this doesn't mean anything. Tell me it's normal for things like this to be buried in someone's garden." Barton didn't answer. He stepped closer, his face hard to read in the lantern's glow. "You need to be careful, Eleanor. This town's been quiet a long time. Stirring things up won't do anyone good." "I'm not here for the town," she said, voice firm. "I'm here for the truth." Barton stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Then keep digging. But know this. Your father didn't just keep secrets, he built them." He turned and disappeared into the dark. Eleanor stood alone again, the shoe in one hand, the doll in the other, the earth yawning open at her feet. She returned to the house, locking the door behind her, and placed the doll on the kitchen table. The shoe she set beside it. Then she sat and stared, searching for a memory that wouldn't come. Who did these things belong to? The next morning brought no peace. The sky was low and thick with haze. Eleanor walked to the general store to pick up supplies: rope, gloves, a lantern with fresh oil, and a small shovel. The clerk didn't ask questions, but his eyes followed her too long. On her way back, children stared at her from porches. An old woman crossed the street to avoid her. The town's whispers had found her again. Back at the estate, she dropped the supplies by the back door and walked through the house, feeling the weight of its history pressing against her. In her father's study, she rifled through drawers until she found the bundle of keys he always kept. Among them, one looked older than the rest, rusted iron with a jagged edge. Her heart leapt. She crossed quickly to the kitchen, knelt before the pantry and tried the key. The padlock snapped open. She stared at the cellar door for a long time, hand resting on the knob. Then she closed it again. Not yet. She needed answers first. Proof. Something she could hold against the dark. The shoe and doll waited in the center of the table, like silent witnesses. She sat down, lit a cigarette with shaking fingers, and whispered to herself, "Whose are you?" Outside, the wind shifted again. The garden rustled. The soil waited. What else lies beneath the Evans garden? Subscribe now to uncover the truth Eleanor is about to face and the secrets that refuse to stay buried. Eleanor stood at the pantry door for a long time the next morning, the key heavy in her hand. The cellar waited behind it, untouched for decades. Part of her feared what might be below. Another part feared never knowing. She unlocked the door. The hinges groaned as it opened. A narrow staircase descended into darkness, the air thick with damp and mildew. She lit the lantern, its warm light casting flickering shadows on the walls, and stepped down slowly, each wooden step groaning under her weight. The smell hit her halfway down, earthy, metallic, with something sour underneath. She tried not to gag. At the bottom, the space opened into a low dirt-floored cellar. Stone walls boxed it in. Wooden shelves lined the far side, filled with dusty jars and tools. Some jars were labeled, roots, herbs, powders, but others held unrecognizable things suspended in yellowed liquid. One looked like a coiled snake, another a hand-sized organ. She stepped further in, the lantern illuminating more of the space. A workbench stood in the corner, covered in papers and glass vials. There were books stacked beside it, thick, bound in leather with no titles on their spines. One lay open. She leaned closer and read aloud. "The earth remembers. The seed is memory. Blood feeds the root." Her stomach turned. Beside the books, An oilskin-wrapped bundle drew her attention. She unwrapped it and found a stack of handwritten journals. The topmost bore the name Samuel Evans, scrawled in bold ink. She sat on a nearby stool and flipped through the first pages. Her father's handwriting was meticulous, firm. The entries began as agricultural records, weather notes, planting cycles, yield results. But after a few pages, the tone shifted. The soil responds to offering. A drop of blood quickens the bloom. I tested a finger prick on the rosebed and saw results in 12 hours. The land hungers, not just water. Something older, something deeper. Another page. Beatrice refuses to understand. She fears what she calls whispers. But the land is not cruel. It demands care, it demands sacrifice, it gives more than it takes. Eleanor's fingers tightened on the page. The next journal continued in the same vein, but the handwriting grew more erratic, more forceful. She watches me now. Margaret is too curious. I told her not to dig, not to go near the tree. She's asking questions. I can't let her remember. Margaret. The name echoed like a bell in Eleanor's skull. She flipped further. Buried the doll, buried the shoe, buried the questions. The soil will take it all. It always has, it always will. The blood drained from her face. She stood suddenly, stumbling back from the table. Her lantern swung and cast warped shadows across the cellar. One landed on the far wall, an outline of something built into the stone. A door. She approached slowly. It was small, iron-bound, more like a hatch than a doorway. No handle, no keyhole. Just markings etched in the stone. Symbols she didn't recognize, old and curling like roots. She reached out, touched the metal. It was cold. Too cold. She stepped back, breath trembling. There were things in this house, things her father had hidden in the walls and earth. She understood now why her mother had been afraid, why the portraits were slashed, why no one in town spoke plainly. She left the cellar, clutching the journals to her chest, and locked the door behind her. Later that day, as the sun burned above the garden, Eleanor sat with Clara May beneath the church's eaves. She laid one of the journals in Clara's lap. Clara opened it, read silently, then looked up. I always knew Samuel was no good, she said, but I didn't know how deep he went. You said Mama was afraid. Did she know what he was doing? She found out too late, Clara said softly. By the time she realized what he was feeding that land, he had already given it too much. Eleanor swallowed. Margaret. He wrote her name. He said she asked too many questions. Clara's gaze held hers. There was a child, long before you came, a girl who vanished. So she was real. Clara nodded once. And I think she never truly left. Eleanor looked down at the ground. The earth beneath her feet felt heavier now. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. The journals haunted her, each page dripping with her father's descent into something far darker than madness. She read until her eyes burned, following the trail of his thoughts, his experiments, his obsessions, his belief that the land responded to blood like water. The deeper she read, the more one truth emerged, growing in her mind like a weed. She might not be who she thought she was. It started with a line she hadn't noticed before. We took her in as our own. The soil whispered her name before she could speak. She belongs to it. Eleanor turned the page with trembling hands. She thrives near the garden, cries when taken away. The roots know her. The blood knows her. She is the promise. The words cut like glass. She stumbled from her bed, the journal clutched to her chest, and crossed the hall to the bathroom. Her reflection stared back. Tired eyes, pale skin, hair wild from tossing in sleep. She looked nothing like Beatrice, and even less like Samuel. She thought of the photograph with the unfamiliar child, the drawing, the erased faces in the attic. She had been certain she was alone, but now the gaps in her memory gaped like wounds. Had there been another girl? Or had she been the other girl? The garden responded to her. It moved, bloomed, breathed around her. Was it grief or recognition? She returned to the cellar at dawn. The air was colder this time, the silence thicker. She lit the lantern again and sat before the table with the books and jars. She opened a smaller journal, one in Beatrice's hand. It was written more delicately, but still marked by fear. I begged Samuel to tell her the truth. I told him the land would take her too. He said she was chosen, said the land had marked her, but I saw the way it watched her, how the flowers bent toward her steps. Another page. Clara says some blood remembers things the mind forgets. I don't know who she really is anymore. All I know is she's not mine. And I fear what she'll become. Eleanor closed the book. She wasn't adopted. She was absorbed, claimed by the house, by the soil, perhaps even by her father's design. A living offering, raised by strangers who pretended to love her, or tried and failed. She felt the walls close in. Back in the garden, the wind shifted as she stepped outside, as though it welcomed her return. She moved to the central mound again, the soil she had disturbed days earlier. Her feet felt heavy as she stepped through the rows, the plants brushing against her like fingertips. She crouched down and dug again, not in search of artifacts this time, but answers. After a few minutes, her fingers struck something soft but solid. Not wood, not metal. She pulled it free. It was a small velvet pouch, soaked and darkened by the earth. She opened it. Inside was a locket. She wiped the dirt away and opened the clasp. Inside, 2 tiny portraits, Beatrice on one side, and on the other, Samuel, younger, smiling faintly. Beneath them, etched in tiny script, "To our girl, the soil's gift." Her chest constricted. She snapped the locket shut and clutched it in her fist. She no longer knew what terrified her more, the possibility that she was adopted, or the chance that she wasn't, that she was born from this place, shaped by it, raised in lies to become something for which she had no say. She took the locket inside, cleaned it and placed it on the table beside the journals. Then she went to the mirror again. She stared, searching for someone she might recognize. The same eyes stared back. Eleanor returned to the attic. She needed proof, not just words on yellowed pages, not whispers in her head or twisted memories, something solid, something undeniable. Her hands shook as she lifted the old trunks and boxes, digging through years of silence. Near the back, hidden beneath a moth-eaten quilt, she found a slim book bound in faded cloth. A schoolbook. Inside, written in neat cursive, was the name Margaret Evans. The pages were filled with arithmetic problems, short poems, childish doodles. On the back cover, a drawing of a girl beneath a tree. The tree bent toward her, its roots curled like fingers. Eleanor sank to her knees. She wasn't imagining her. Margaret was real, and she had vanished. Downstairs, Eleanor flipped through her father's journals again, searching for dates, names, anything. One entry, half torn, mentioned April 3rd, 1924. She wouldn't stop asking. She went to the garden again. The tree won't hold her much longer. I told Beatrice she wasn't ready, but she made her choice. The words chilled her. She returned to the garden, her gaze fixed on the gnarled pecan tree near the eastern fence. It stood alone, its roots thick and twisted, as if grasping something beneath the surface. A place that once felt safe in her childhood, now pulsed with dread. She circled the tree, eyes scanning the ground. The soil near the base looked different, looser, darker. Her knees hit the earth. She began to dig. Inch by inch, the dirt gave way, revealing a strange symmetry. Stones carefully placed formed a rough border. Beneath them, something softer. She pulled back a piece of stained cloth, then bone, small, fragile, human. Her hands recoiled, but her body remained frozen. Her breath came in shallow gasps. She had uncovered a shallow grave. Tears burned her eyes as she stared at the tiny rib cage, the faded scraps of a child's dress still clinging to the remains. A necklace lay tangled in the soil, a cheap charm shaped like a bird. Margaret, the name pressed against her throat like glass. She didn't scream. She covered the remains with trembling care and stumbled back inside the house. Her thoughts spun violently. This was no accident. No illness, no childhood mishap. Someone had buried her sister beneath the tree. She thought of her father's words. The soil takes, the soil remembers. She had to know more. She needed answers that weren't buried in rotting journals or etched in twisted roots. She went into town and found Thomas at the schoolhouse preparing lessons. When he saw her face, pale and drawn, he dropped his chalk. "I found her," she whispered. He said nothing. "Margaret, my sister. She's real, and she's buried in the garden." Still, silence. "I need you to help me," she said. "I need to know if she ever went to school, if there's a record, something." Thomas nodded slowly. "There were rumors, years ago, before my time here. People said the Evans had 2 daughters, but the second one disappeared. No one ever confirmed it. Your father told the town she died young, sickly, buried out back. And no one asked questions." "They were afraid," Thomas said. "Your father wasn't the kind of man people confronted." Eleanor felt sick. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I wasn't sure what was true. I grew up thinking I was alone," she said, voice cracking. "And she died out there, alone." "Forgotten." Thomas stepped forward, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We'll find out everything. We'll check the school records, hospital files, church logs. Someone wrote her down somewhere." She nodded, eyes burning. That night, Eleanor returned to the tree. She stood in silence, the wind rustling the leaves above her, the scent of damp soil rising around her. "Margaret," she whispered, "I remember you now. I won't let them forget again." The ground was still beneath her feet, but the garden felt restless, like it had heard, like it didn't want to be named. Eleanor arrived at Clara May's cottage just after dawn. The sky was still soft with morning haze, but her chest was tight, the image of the bones beneath the tree etched behind her eyes. She had spent most of the night awake, staring at the ceiling, Margaret's name on her lips. Clara opened the door before Eleanor could knock. "I felt you coming," she said. They sat in silence at the small kitchen table, the only sound the slow bubbling of a kettle. Clara poured tea without speaking. Eleanor cupped the warm mug, her hands stiff with tension. "I need to know everything," she said finally. Clara didn't flinch. She folded her hands in her lap. "You're sure?" I dug her up. The room seemed to still. "She was under the tree," Eleanor continued, voice trembling. "My sister, Margaret, he buried her there." Clara let out a long, low breath. "I always feared it." "You knew her?" Clara nodded. "She was bright, curious, like you. She asked questions the land didn't want answered. And Samuel, he never liked questions." Eleanor felt her throat close. "Why didn't you say anything? Why did no one say anything?" "I was the help," Clara said. "A voice folks didn't want to hear. And your father had power, fear mostly, it was enough. But my mother, Beatrice, she knew, didn't she?" "She did," Clara said softly. "Not at first. But she figured it out. Margaret didn't just vanish. She was taken by that man's obsession. Why didn't she leave? She tried, but he twisted her, like he twisted everything, told her the land needed sacrifice, told her Margaret was chosen, said it was all to keep the garden alive." Eleanor pressed her palms to her eyes. "He murdered his own daughter." Clara's voice was barely a whisper. "It wasn't just him." Eleanor looked up, frozen. "The land," Clara said, "it had a hunger, and Samuel believed feeding it would give him control, prosperity, power. He saw signs in the growth, rain when no one else got rain, crops when others starved." Eleanor shook her head. "It's just dirt." Clara leaned forward. "Child, you felt it. Don't lie to yourself. That garden moves when it wants. It grows in the dead of drought. That soil is old, older than anyone here. Your father didn't create the curse, he just obeyed it." Eleanor's voice cracked. "And me? What am I to it?" Clara hesitated. "Tell me," Eleanor begged. "You were born under blood," Clara said. "Not just Samuel's child, something else touched you, the land knew you. It's why you were spared when Margaret wasn't." Eleanor felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her. "I don't understand." "You don't have to understand to feel it," Clara said. "You were the seed he kept. You were meant to be the future of it, the promise he made to the land when he took Margaret." Eleanor recoiled. "That's madness." Clara placed a firm hand over hers. "It's truth." The room grew quiet. "I think your mother tried to stop him," Clara continued. "I think she wrote that note, left the journals, but by then she was too far gone. The land had her." Eleanor remembered the scribbled word. Run. She had thought it was fear. Maybe it had been guilt. She stood abruptly. "I'm going to burn it. All of it." "The garden, the cellar, the house." Clara's expression didn't change. "It won't let go easy." "I don't care. It ends with me." Clara nodded slowly. "Then you'll need more than fire. You'll need truth. Full truth. Not just his. Not just hers. Yours." Eleanor's voice was hoarse. "How?" Clara reached beneath the table and pulled out a small box. Inside was a bundle of old church papers yellowed with time. Baptism records, birth entries, and tucked among them, a birth certificate. Eleanor Evans, born October 3rd, 1913. Mother, unknown. Father, Samuel Evans. Notes. Found on the estate grounds, taken in by family. The paper trembled in her hands. She was never Beatrice's child. She had always belonged to the land. Eleanor returned to the house with the birth certificate in her coat pocket and fire in her chest. The truth moved through her veins like something alive. She wasn't Beatrice's daughter. She had never belonged to the family in any way that counted. She was found, claimed, molded, used, but no more. She entered the garden with a shovel in one hand and a lantern in the other. The wind had picked up, thick with dust and the scent of damp decay. The soil had darkened again, slick as oil. Every step felt like a challenge, as if the ground resisted her. She knelt beside the largest plot to the west of the garden, where the vegetables had once grown in eerie abundance. Something about that corner had always disturbed her. She began to dig. The first few inches were easy, loose earth, soft and yielding. But then came resistance, a series of hard thumps. Not stone, not wood, bone. One by one, the shapes emerged, small skulls, ribs like the bones of birds, tiny vertebrae, scattered and broken. Children, not one, not two, dozens. Eleanor dropped the shovel, her stomach turning. Her father had lied, not just about Margaret. Not just about her. There had been others, sacrifices to the land, to feed the soil, to keep the house alive. Her knees sank into the dirt as she stared into the shallow grave. These children had no names, no graves, no stories, just the silence of this cursed garden. And beneath them, more. A root, thick and pale like a worm, pulsed faintly beneath the bones. She reached for it. The moment her fingers touched it, the world lurched. A vision flooded her mind, not memory, not dream. A voice echoed, older than language, resonant and full of hunger. She saw her father kneeling in the cellar, his hand bleeding into a bowl of crushed herbs. She saw Beatrice sobbing in the parlor, rocking a child wrapped in black cloth. She saw the tree blooming with red flowers, petals like blood, and then herself, standing in the garden, smiling, offering. Eleanor gasped and pulled her hand away. The earth trembled faintly. She stumbled back, heart pounding, and ran to the cellar. She had to see the rest, had to find what he had hidden in the walls. The hatch in the stone still waited at the far end. She approached it with the same key that had opened the main cellar door, even knowing it wouldn't work. She pushed anyway. The hatch creaked open. Inside was a cavity no larger than a coffin, but it was filled. Bundles of cloth, bones wrapped in linen, hair ribbons, bits of jewelry, dozens of small tokens from forgotten children, and in the center, Margaret's music box. She reached for it. Her hand trembled. The lid creaked as it opened, and the melody began to play. A lullaby. Her lullaby. Her body seized. The melody pulled at something deep within her chest, something older than her name, older than her memories, a part of her that belonged to the soil, a part her father had awakened, nurtured, fed. She slammed the lid shut and collapsed backward. "I am not yours," she whispered. The cellar seemed to breathe. The jars on the shelves rattled, the walls creaked, but she didn't run. She climbed out, clutching the music box, and ascended the stairs. In the kitchen, she set the box beside the journals, the photographs, the locket, the evidence. She would not let this story vanish. They would be remembered. She stepped back outside and faced the garden. The sun had not yet risen. But the roots had. The garden has revealed its harvest, but Eleanor's reckoning is only just beginning. Subscribe now, because the land demands an answer, and she must choose what to bury and what to burn. Eleanor awoke on the parlor floor, the smell of soil clinging to her skin. She had no memory of falling asleep. Her last thought had been the music box. Now it sat silent beside her, closed but still humming softly, as if the tune had embedded itself into the very wood. She sat up slowly, her body aching. The morning light had not yet breached the windows. The house was darker than it should have been. She tried to stand, but something stopped her. A sound, a wet, dragging sound coming from beneath the floorboards. She held her breath. It moved, slow, deliberate, under the floor, across the parlor, toward the base of the staircase. Then silence. She rose shakily and followed the noise. Her feet creaked along the wood, every board seeming to shift beneath her weight. At the base of the stairs, a single crack split open the floor. From it, a thin root protruded, writhing like a worm in the open air. She stepped back, revulsion and fear twining in her chest. The root twisted toward her. She fled up the stairs. Her room felt no safer. She locked the door behind her, though she knew a lock meant nothing to the thing beneath them. Her hands trembled as she reached for her father's journal again. One entry stood out, scribbled at the end of a page, nearly illegible. The land remembers what we try to forget. It protects its own, but it does not forgive. It wants balance. It wants her. Her. Eleanor slammed the book shut. The garden didn't want the house, or the cellar, or the memory of Samuel Evans. It wanted her. She went to the mirror again, stared into her reflection. Her face was pale, streaked with dirt, her eyes bloodshot. And yet behind that exhaustion something else lurked. A familiarity. She could no longer deny it. She felt the land's pull, not just fear, but something deeper. A connection. She pressed her palm to the glass. Her hand twitched involuntarily. A pain bloomed in her chest, sudden and sharp, like something had torn loose inside her. She collapsed to her knees. A vision overtook her. The cellar again. But this time alive. Lanterns lit. Her father kneeling before the hatch, chanting words in a language that curled like smoke. Her mother standing behind him, tears on her face, a bundle in her arms. A child. Her. Beatrice stepped forward, reluctant. Samuel took the bundle, held it over the hatch and cut his palm. Blood fell onto the child's forehead. The vision twisted. Now she saw the tree, the one where Margaret lay buried, splitting open at its base, revealing a tunnel beneath. A heartbeat throbbed from the soil. Eleanor screamed. She came to gasping, sweat pouring down her face. She was in the hallway, though she didn't remember leaving the room. The music box was in her hand, though she had left it in the parlor. Something was changing. The boundary between memory, dream, and reality was dissolving. She ran, not away, but down, into the cellar. The air was thicker now, the stench of mold and rot nearly unbearable. The roots had grown, bursting through the cracks, threading along the walls. The hatch was wide open. Inside, the items she had seen, Margaret's music box, the trinkets, the bones, were gone. Only soil remained, wet, pulsing. She reached out, unable to stop herself, and touched it. Pain surged through her arm, up her shoulder, into her skull. A voice, deeper than thought, filled her mind. You are the seed, the bloom, the fruit. She tore herself away, screaming, clutching her arm. When she stumbled back into the kitchen, the back door was open. The garden was no longer still. It moved. Rows of plants trembled. Vines twisted in the air. Roots breached the ground like fingers clawing free. The garden was alive. It had waited long enough. Eleanor sat at the edge of the garden, the morning light bruising the sky, her hands caked in dried soil. She felt hollow. Not empty, but stripped. The roots had spoken to her. Or maybe they had always been speaking, and now she simply understood. She didn't know how long she had been there when Thomas appeared. His voice broke the silence. I came as soon as I heard. She looked up slowly. Heard what? That someone saw you digging again. Town's stirring. They think you've lost your mind." Eleanor stood. "And what do you think?" "I think you've been through hell." He stepped closer, his eyes scanning her face. She studied his expression. Too careful, too composed. "You knew," she said, "didn't you?" Thomas's breath caught. "I found the grave," Eleanor continued. "Margaret, under the pecan tree. She was real. You said you didn't remember her, but you lied." Thomas's jaw clenched. Eleanor's voice rose. "You said nothing. Let me believe I imagined it." "I was trying to protect you," he said, but the words rang hollow. "From what?" "From the truth, from my own life." Thomas looked away. "Your father, he made people afraid, not just of him, of what he believed, what he did. My father told me to stay away from your family, said the Evans were marked." "And you listened," Eleanor said bitterly. "You watched this house rot, watched me fall apart, and did nothing." "I was a boy," he snapped. "I didn't understand then. And now?" Now his silence spoke louder than his words. Eleanor stepped back. "Did you help him?" Thomas shook his head fiercely. "No, never. But I didn't stop him either." The space between them felt like an ocean. "You let me come back here alone," she said, "knowing what I'd find, knowing what I am." "I didn't want to believe it," he whispered. "But you did." The wind moved through the garden like breath. The plants rustled. The roots shifted beneath the ground. "You need to go," Eleanor said. "Please," Thomas said, stepping forward. "You don't have to do this alone." "But I am alone," she said. "I always have been." Thomas reached out, but she pulled away. "Get out." He hesitated, then turned and walked back through the gate. Eleanor watched until he disappeared down the road. The betrayal sat heavy in her chest, deeper than anger. She had trusted him, clung to the idea that someone had stood beside her, but now she saw it clearly. She had always stood alone. Inside the house, she packed the journals into a crate, the photographs, the music box, the locket, every piece of truth she could carry. She left them in the front room. Then she lit the first match. The flame caught fast, old wood, dry paper, the rot of time all too eager to burn. Smoke billowed into the halls. The house wailed in creaks and groans as the fire devoured it. But Eleanor didn't leave. She walked through the smoke out the back door into the garden. The roots welcomed her. They rose, coiling around her feet like vines. The ground pulsed, alive with heat. Beneath her skin she felt the echo of the earth's hunger, the promise, the bloodline. She raised her arms. "I am not yours." The roots hesitated. "I was never his, never theirs. I choose my own end." The fire reached the back of the house, flames licking the sky. The garden hissed, the roots recoiled. She turned her back on the house and walked into the garden's heart. The fire raged behind her, consuming the Evans house in a tower of smoke and memory. Eleanor stood at the garden's edge, the glow casting flickering shadows across the soil. The earth beneath her feet trembled, no longer subtle, no longer hiding. The land knew what she had done, but it hadn't let go. She stepped into the center of the garden, where the vines coiled around scorched roots and ash blue like snow. Beneath her the earth shifted, groaning as if waking from a long sleep. Then came the rumble. The soil cracked open. She stumbled back as the ground split in two, revealing something hidden deep below, stone bound in rusted metal, shaped not like a tomb but a vault. A door with no hinges, no lock, just a single symbol carved into its surface. A twisted tree with bleeding roots. Eleanor felt it pulse in her chest. She knelt, pressed her palm against the stone. It opened. The vault hissed with ancient air, foul and cold, the scent of rot so thick she gagged. Inside, a narrow stairwell spiraled down into blackness. Carved walls lined the passage, etched with runes and symbols too old to name. The further she descended, the more she felt it. The pull, not physical, but ancestral, like blood remembering blood. The passage opened into a low chamber, circular, with roots snaking across every inch of wall and ceiling. The roots throbbed faintly, as if breathing. In the center lay an altar of black stone, and on it, bones, small, brittle, stacked like offerings, children, more than she could count. A lump rose in her throat. Rage trembled in her hands. Her father had buried the past, not just beneath the garden, but in the heart of the land itself. This was no accident. No symbolic shrine, it was the root of it all. And beside the altar stood a single object, an iron basin carved with the same tree that marked the vault. Dried blood caked its edges. A blade rested beside it. She stepped forward. Every part of her screamed to turn back, but she had come too far. There was no retreat. As she touched the basin, a voice echoed in her skull, not a word, but a presence, cold, knowing, hungry. The blood returns. The garden above shifted. She could feel it. The roots curling, the land bracing. She turned to the altar. Then she screamed. On the far side of the chamber, set into the wall like a mirror, was a window, a sheet of obsidian, polished and perfect, and in it, her reflection. But it wasn't her. The figure staring back wore her face, but not her eyes. The eyes were hollow, black, endless. The mouth curled into a grin. She stumbled back. The reflection raised a hand, pressed it to the glass. The roots around the room writhed violently. Eleanor understood. This was the seed, the promise her father had made, the being the land had nurtured, bound to her by name, by blood. It wanted her to take her place, to rise. "No," she whispered. "You don't get to wear my face." She turned, climbed the stairwell, lungs burning. Behind her the chamber shuddered, cracks split the walls, dust fell, the vault groaned. She reached the garden as the sky turned red with firelight. The roots had risen now, twisting like snakes, snapping the earth. She ran to the shed, grabbed the last can of kerosene, and splashed it across the base of the garden. Then she struck a match. The fire erupted. The soil screamed. Roots burst into flame, shriveling, thrashing. The garden convulsed, the vault below crumbling in on itself. She fell to her knees, watching it burn, her body shaking. The land resisted, but it burned. The voices wailed, the roots withered. And still she knelt, tears streaking down her face until nothing remained but scorched earth and silence. Eleanor stood. She had dug up the past. Now it was time to bury it. The fire had died, but the ash still clung to Eleanor's clothes, her skin, her breath. She stood alone in the ruins of the garden, its once living walls now blackened husks. Smoke curled upward like fading memory. The house was gone. The cellar sealed beneath rubble. The vault collapsed, but she remained. And so did the pull. Beneath her ribs, something stirred. A thread she couldn't cut, a whisper she couldn't silence. The land wasn't finished. She knew it even before the tremor shook the ground. A shudder rolled through the earth, deep, slow, steady, not violent, rhythmic. As if something far below still breathed, still waited. She staggered back, her heart thudding. "No," she muttered. "You're gone. I burned you. I ended it." But the ground pulsed again. And then she heard it. A voice, not like the others, not in her head. Real, soft, familiar. Eleanor. She turned, mouth dry. A girl stood at the edge of the scorched garden, barefoot, dirty. Her dress torn and grey with soot, but her face, Eleanor recognized it in an instant. Margaret. Alive. No, not alive. The girl wasn't breathing. Her chest didn't rise. Her eyes were vacant, wide, her skin too pale. Yet she stood there, solid, watching. Eleanor stepped forward. "Margaret?" The girl blinked slowly. "You shouldn't have burned it." Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes. "I had to. He used you. He buried you." Margaret shook her head. "We were part of it, all of us. You were supposed to stay." "I'm not one of them." "Yes, you are," Margaret whispered. "You always were." The wind picked up, swirling ash around them. Eleanor clenched her fists. "You died for nothing," she said. "He lied to all of us, used our blood to feed that land." Margaret didn't respond. Eleanor stepped closer. "You can be free now. I burned the root." Margaret smiled faintly. "Not all of it." And then she vanished. Eleanor stood in the silence, heart hammering. She knew what Margaret meant. The roots were still inside her, not physical, but inherited, woven into her name, into her soul. She was the final seed. Her father hadn't just fed the garden, he had grown it in her. She fell to her knees. Everything she had done, every step, every choice had led her here, and it hadn't been free will, it had been instinct, an invisible pull. The land hadn't needed to speak, it had always spoken through her. But now she had a choice. She opened the pouch Clara had given her, hidden in her coat. Inside were herbs, ash, and a thin vial of clear liquid, a mixture of poison and cleansing tincture. Old ways, earth magic. She poured the contents onto the soil and whispered the words Clara had taught her, words passed through generations, meant to sever blood from soil, soul from curse. The ground shook, roots burst from beneath, blackened and screeching. She stood, fire in her eyes. "You don't own me." The soil buckled. "You fed on pain, on silence, but I've spoken your name. I've dug your graves, I've burned your temple." She raised the final match in her hand. "And I'm not yours." The roots surged toward her, but too late. She struck the match, dropped it onto the soaked earth. The flames erupted, white fire, cleansing. The roots howled, curling, snapping, dying. The land shivered, then stilled. The garden was gone, not just burned. Gone. The pull in her chest vanished. The thread snapped. Silence fell. Eleanor dropped to her knees, sobbing, not from fear but from release. The land no longer called to her. The blood no longer spoke. She was free. The morning after the fire, Eleanor woke on the porch steps, soot staining her palms, the taste of smoke still in her mouth. The sun rose over a changed landscape. Nothing left but scorched earth, skeletal trees, and a sky washed clean by the night's storm. The house was gone, reduced to blackened stone and tangled metal. The garden, once the heart of all her nightmares, was nothing but ash. For the first time in her life there was silence, no whispers beneath her feet, no pulsing roots, no visions pressing against the inside of her skull, only her breath, slow and unburdened. She stood, wincing at the ache in her limbs. She walked the perimeter of the property, each step leaving tracks in the soft grey ash. Where the pecan tree once stood, a patch of green was already breaking through, a wild clover, fragile and ordinary. Eleanor knelt, touching the clover's leaves, and felt nothing. No memory. No call. Just the peace of empty ground. The soil had finally released her. She returned to the place where the house had stood. In the rubble, she found the crate she had packed. Her father's journals, the music box, the locket, the faded photographs. The fire had touched the edges but spared the contents inside. She lifted them gently, one by one, and placed them in a canvas bag. The story needed to be told, not as a warning, not as a curse, but as truth. She walked into town, passing neighbors who watched in silence. Some looked away, others nodded with wary respect. In front of the church, she found Clara May tending a bed of marigolds, her hands already dark with earth. "It's done," Eleanor said. Clara nodded, her eyes soft and proud. "You did what none of them could." "I wasn't alone," Eleanor replied. "You gave me the words, the truth." Clara smiled, the lines of her face deepening. "You freed us all." Eleanor left the journals and photos at the church steps, a testament for whoever dared to read them. She wrote her own story in a thin, leather-bound book, sparing no detail. Her fears, her dreams, her rage and her hope, the garden's hunger, her family's lies, the sister she lost, and the freedom she won. She did not stay in Amarillo. With nothing left to tie her to the land, she traveled north, finding work as a teacher in a small, quiet town. Her nights were peaceful, undisturbed by visions or voices. Sometimes she dreamed of Margaret, her face gentle, her voice clear. In those dreams, the two of them walked together in a garden filled only with wildflowers, sunlight, and the scent of spring. Eleanor grew older, her hair streaked with silver, her hands steady. She married, raised a daughter, and taught her not to fear the darkness but to face it, name it, and never let it feed on silence. Years passed. The Evans land remained empty, grass slowly overtaking the scars of fire. Nothing built on it again. People spoke of it rarely, the truth fading into legend, then rumor, then shadow. But sometimes at dusk, when the sky turned the color of old bruises, a passerby might glimpse a woman standing among the wildflowers, head bowed in prayer. They said she was an Evans, the last one. But Eleanor knew the truth. She was free, not just of the house and garden, but of the name, the hunger, the curse. She had buried the past, not to forget, but to make way for something new. And in the end, that was enough. If you've stayed with Eleanor through every shadow, secret, and heartbreak, thank you. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories that dig deep into the dark, the forgotten, and the extraordinary. And if you want to keep unraveling mysteries, click the suggested video on your screen and continue this journey with us.